The ceiling came down first, not with a slow groan or a warning crack. It just dropped, a wall of fire and concrete swallowing the left side of the lab in a single violent breath. Servers exploded, glass shattered, and somewhere inside that inferno, a young woman was still alive. She crawled, fingers bleeding, lungs burning, every instinct in her body screaming at her to stop. But she didn't stop, because pressed against her chest like it was her own heartbeat was a hard drive, and on that hard drive was every line of code she had spent 3 years of her life building. Her proof, her future, her name. Her name was Zara Novelle. She was 21 years old, and she had just cracked something that the entire cryptography world said was impossible. She reached the door, reached up for the handle, almost out. A pair of shoes stepped in front of her. She looked up through the smoke, through the blood running into her left eye, and she saw a face. Calm, composed, almost bored. A man in his 50s crouching down slowly, studying her the way you study something you've already decided to discard. Director Baek Sung-ho, her handler, the only person in Seoul who knew she existed. He looked at the hard drive pressed against her chest. Then he looked at her, and without a single word, he pried it from her grip, stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked into the darkness beyond the fire. She reached after him. Her fingers found nothing. The ceiling came down between them, and the world went black. Before we go any further, if you've never seen a story like this on this channel, you are exactly where you need to be right now. Hit that subscribe button because we tell stories here that stay with you long after the screen goes dark, like this one. Keep watching, because what happens next, nobody saw coming. Not even her. Seoul, 6 years later, 11:43 p.m. The Skyvault Lounge sat 52 floors above the city, suspended in glass and ambition, the kind of place where power didn't announce itself because it didn't have to. Jazz moved through the air like smoke. Crystal glasses caught the light. Below, Seoul blazed like a circuit board seen from space. All that electricity, all that human hunger compressed into something almost beautiful. Zara Novelle moved through the room like she was invisible, which was exactly how she needed it. She was 27 now. The scar along her left collarbone had faded to a thin silver line, hidden beneath the collar of a black waitress uniform. Her name tag said, Su-ah. Her expression said nothing at all. She carried her tray through clusters of bankers and generals and venture capitalists, clearing glasses, pouring water, watching everything. 6 years of rebuilding herself from nothing, learning Korean until she dreamed in it, learning patience until it stopped feeling like waiting and started feeling like strategy. 6 years to get to this room, on this floor, with this tray. Because somewhere in this room was the man who had built a $3 billion empire on the grave they dug for her. She spotted him immediately. Jaewon Shin was 29, and he carried his authority the way young men do when they've had to fight older men for every inch of it, with a kind of controlled intensity that made the room feel slightly smaller. He was mid-story, the table hanging on every word. Beside him sat Yoona Kwon, 28, sharp and composed, the quiet engine behind much of Novatech's public strategy. Jaewon reached into his jacket and pulled out a cocktail napkin, uncapped a pen, and slowly, deliberately, began to write. Zara moved closer, clearing a glass that didn't need clearing. She saw the symbols take shape, hexadecimals, recursive notation, a sequence that unspooled across the paper in a handwriting that wasn't hers, but in a logic that absolutely, unmistakably was. Her tray tilted. She caught it. That's the Cassandra Protocol. That's my architecture, my sequence, my work. Jaewon slid the napkin to the center of the table. Novatech's static root key. The seed of a $3 billion defense encryption system. He leaned back. Name your price if you can crack this code. Nervous laughter rippled through the table. Chairman Lim shifted uncomfortably. Nobody reached for the napkin. Zara set down her tray. 6 years of careful planning. 6 years of controlled fury. And then she looked at that napkin, her own fingerprint on a stranger's cocktail naipu. 당신은 변수를 놓쳤어요. You missed a variable. The table went silent. Jaewon turned slowly. And for the first time, Zara Novelle and Jaewon Shin looked directly at each other. He didn't smirk. He didn't dismiss her. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he cannot immediately explain, with the full, unguarded weight of his attention. Which variable? She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then picked up her tray and walked away without answering. The light caught the scar at her collarbone as she pushed through the kitchen door. Jaewon saw it. He didn't know why it mattered, but he didn't look away. Yuna watched him stare at the door long after it had closed. Something shifted quietly behind her eyes. She picked up her glass and said nothing. The Hongdae basement smelled like instant noodles and old circuitry. Marco had lived in worse places and decorated accordingly. 3 monitors, a folding cot, a wall of sticky notes that made sense only to him and, apparently, to Zara. She paced. He watched her pace, then without looking up from his ramen. Did someone die or did you just run out of soy sauce? She stopped pacing, stared at him. You have the face, he said seriously. The face you make when something has gone either very wrong or very right, and you haven't decided which yet. I saw my own code on a billionaire's cocktail napkin. Marco set down his chopsticks with the gravity of a man receiving life-altering news. Okay, he said slowly. That's not a soy sauce problem. The Cassandra Protocol, my exact recursive architecture, my signature sequence, 404 Elmwood Drive, October 3rd, 1974, my mother's birthday, my childhood address in Atlanta. She turned to the monitors. You don't accidentally build that, Marco. You don't stumble into someone else's grief and call it your own. He was already pulling his chair up beside her, the ramen forgotten. Then let's find out exactly who did. Her fingers moved fast. Novatech's firewall was sophisticated. She'd been chipping at it for weeks. But tonight something had shifted in her. She was through the first layer in 11 minutes, the second in 4, and then buried in 6-year-old transfer files behind 3 levels of encrypted folders that someone had tried very hard to make boring. She found a name. Director Baek Sung-ho. Over and over. Transaction receipts, internal memos, a hard drive transfer logged at 11:58 p.m. on the night of the lab explosion, 12 minutes after the fire started. She sat back in her chair, very still. There you are. Across the city, in a private study that smelled of old books and deliberate quiet, Director Baek Sung-ho sat alone at his desk. He opened the bottom drawer, the locked one. Inside, a manila folder worn at the edges from years of being opened and closed and opened again, though never often enough to suggest doubt, just often enough to suggest habit. He lifted out a photograph. A young black woman, 21, bright-eyed, caught mid-laugh in what looked like a research lab. Below it, 7 pages of a MIT research submission, her name at the top, her work filling every line. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. In the silence of the study, in the absence of anyone to perform his certainty for, something moved across his face. Not remorse, not guilt, something smaller and more uncomfortable than either of those. The hairline crack in a wall that has been load-bearing for so long you've stopped checking whether it's still sound. He closed the folder, locked the drawer, straightened his jacket, back to stone. In his penthouse office across the Han River, Jaewon Shin was not sleeping either. He sat at his desk with the cocktail napkin in front of him and a folder open on his laptop that he hadn't opened in 2 years. An anomaly he'd flagged in Novatech's original source code at 24. A recursive sequence that didn't match the internal development timeline. A loop that felt, to him at the time, like it had come from somewhere else entirely. He'd brought it to Bayek. Bayek had smiled and called it a formatting artifact. Jaewon had accepted that answer because the company needed the defense contract and he needed the company to survive. Sometimes you choose the answer that lets you keep going. He had not forgotten that he made that choice. He'd just gotten very good at not looking directly at it. He looked at it now. The waitress. The way she'd said it. Not like someone guessing, like someone who had been waiting 6 years to say it out loud. He picked up his phone, almost called back. Put it down. Opened the anomaly file instead and stared at the sequence until his eyes burned. Back in the basement, Zara found something she wasn't expecting. Deep in Novatech's internal system, attached to the anomaly file. A flag. A timestamp. An internal query raised by a user ID she traced back in 40 seconds. Jaewon Shin. 4 years ago. He had found it. He had asked. And then the flag had been closed. Marked resolved. By Director Bayek. Zara stared at the screen for a long time. He asked, she said quietly. Marco leaned over her shoulder. Then someone told him to drop it. And he dropped it. Does that make him guilty? She didn't answer right away. Outside, Seoul hummed and glittered. Finally. It makes him complicated. Marco nodded slowly. Then, because he could not help himself even in serious moments. Complicated is my middle name. He paused. My actual middle name is Giuseppe, but complicated is more accurate. Zara looked at him. Despite everything, despite 6 years and a burning lab and a napkin that had rearranged her entire evening. She almost laughed. Almost. She turned back to the monitors. There was still work to do. You're halfway through this story, and if you're still watching right now, you already know something is coming that's going to change everything. Drop a comment right now. Just the word Cassandra, so we know you made it this far. Keep watching. The next 5 minutes are the ones that matter most. The Seoul Innovation Gala occupied the entire Grand Hyatt ballroom the following evening. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls, a string quartet working through something melancholy in the corner, and every significant name in Korean tech moving through the space with the careful choreography of people who understood that being seen was its own form of currency. Zara walked in as Dr. Aisha Brennan, Nigerian-American tech investor, in a deep burgundy gown she had chosen specifically because it left the scar at her collarbone visible. Not hidden, not displayed. Just there. Like a fact. She had a plan. Get close to Jaewon. Deploy the graphene wafer. A razor-thin device in her clutch capable of rerouting network signals and injecting data. Broadcast the Cassandra archives across every screen in the building. Expose everything. Walk away. Clean. No conversation required. Jaewon saw her the moment she walked through the door. He was mid-sentence with Minister Choi. He lost the sentence entirely. Yuna standing beside him followed his eyeline across the ballroom. She recognized the waitress immediately. Even in Burgundy, even with a different name. She recognized something else too. Something in Jaewon's face she had been quietly waiting for, and quietly dreading, for longer than she wanted to admit. Jaewon excused himself and crossed the entire ballroom to reach her. Not subtle. He did it anyway. Dr. Brennan, he said. Interesting name. Interesting evening. I've been thinking about what you said last night. People say a lot of things at open bars. Not in perfect Korean. Not about that specific sequence. A pause. She tilted her head slightly. What sequence? Almost a smile. The one you already know. They ended up on the dance floor. She told herself it was strategic. A waltz, slow and careful, 2 people moving in the same direction without yet agreeing on the destination. He talked more than she expected. The anomaly, his unease, the question he had buried 4 years ago and hadn't fully stopped thinking about since. He said that something about Novatech's original source code had never fully sat right with him. That he had asked the question once and been told to let it go. That he had let it go. He didn't make excuses for that. He just said it, plainly. and let it sit between them. She kept her face neutral. She was very good at that, but underneath the plan and the patience and the 6 years of controlled fury, something shifted very slightly off its axis. This was not the monster she had constructed in the dark. This was something considerably more inconvenient than a monster. He said something in Korean, almost to himself, not quite intending her to hear. 왜 이렇게 낯익은 느낌이 들지? Why do you feel so familiar? She caught the tone. Not the words, but the tone was enough to make her miss a half step. Across the ballroom, Yuna held her champagne glass in both hands and watched, and her face was very still, and she made a decision that was quiet and painful, and entirely her own. In the shadows near the east corridor, Director Bayek watched the dance with the expression of a man watching a controlled experiment develop an unexpected variable. His jaw tightened. He reached for his phone. Detain the American woman after the gala. Quietly. They found her near the east exit, 2 men in earpieces moving smooth and professional through the thinning crowd. Zara clocked them both in the same second, calculated exits, counted steps. Then a hand closed gently around her elbow from behind. Walk with me, Jaewon said quietly. Now. They moved together through a service door, down a corridor smelling of catering trays and floor cleaner. And then they were running, her heels in one hand, bare feet on cold concrete, his jacket off and around her shoulders before she'd registered the cold. They stopped in a stairwell between floors, backs against the wall, catching their breath. Who are you, really? He said. She looked at him. And then something sharp and self-correcting fired through her. What am I doing? This is the enemy. This is the man who took everything. She pushed off the wall, turned away. I need to go. You're not going anywhere with those men still in the building. I'll manage. Zara. She stopped, turned back slowly. He hadn't known her name 30 seconds ago. She hadn't told him her name. Her real name. How do you... I've been investigating my own company for 3 days, he said quietly. Since the moment you walked away from that table, I found the transfer files, I found Bayek's name, and I found a research submission from MIT. He paused, with your photograph on the front page. The stairwell was very quiet. She looked at him for a long time, measuring, recalculating, 6 years of certainty reorganizing itself into something more complicated and considerably more difficult to act on. Then she told him everything. The lab, the code, MIT. 3 years building the Cassandra protocol through a handler she trusted. The explosion, crawling through fire, the hard drive. Bayek's face calm and certain, stepping over her body like she was furniture. Jaewon didn't speak for a long time after she finished. When he did, his voice was very quiet. The sequence anomaly I flagged. 404 Elmwood Drive, she said. October 3rd, 1974. My mother's birthday. My childhood home in Atlanta. She met his eyes. I embedded it as a signature, so deep in the architecture that only I would know to look for it. It was my name, written in the only language I trusted completely. He pulled out his phone, opened the anomaly file, looked at the sequence, looked at her. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, the jacket around her shoulders, and produced a photograph. Old, creased, folded and unfolded many times. A printout of her MIT research submission. Her name at the top, her face in the corner, her work across 7 pages. My father left it in his private papers, he said. He died 3 years ago. I found it, and I didn't. I didn't understand what it was. I didn't know who you were. His voice tightened. He was trying to leave me a trail, and I didn't follow it far enough. Zara looked at the photograph of her 21-year-old self, completely unaware of what was coming. And when you found the anomaly, she said softly. When you asked the question, and Beck told you to drop it, she looked up at him. What did you choose? He could have explained it. contextualized it, made it smaller. She watched him consciously reject all of that. I chose the company, he said. I needed it to survive, and I told myself the anomaly was nothing. I knew it wasn't nothing. A pause that cost him something. I looked away. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in 6 years. Not innocent. Not villainous. Painfully, recognizably, human. The stairwell door above them crashed open. Bayek's men were efficient. There was no dramatic struggle, just the cold geometry of people who knew how to move other people where they needed to go. They were taken upward through the building's service levels, past rows of humming servers breathing the Cassandra protocol in and out 24 hours a day, and into the glass-walled penthouse overlooking Seoul. Beck sat, poured himself a drink, and began to explain himself, not defensively. That was the most chilling part. He explained the theft and the explosion and the erasure of Zara Novelle the way a surgeon explains a difficult procedure, with precision, professional distance, and the absolute conviction of a man who had made the same argument to himself so many thousands of times it had calcified into something resembling belief. The political climate 6 years ago was not ready for what you represented, he said. A young black American woman as the architect of Korea's most critical defense encryption system. The nationalist bloc would have dismantled the contract before the ink dried. The work would have been buried. He looked at her. Your work? I preserved it. You stepped over me while the building burned, Zara said. I made a calculation. My mother thought I was dead for 8 months. The room went very quiet. Something happened in Bayek's face that he could not fully prevent. Not the shattering of a man confronting his crimes. He was too disciplined for that. But the hairline crack from the locked drawer, the one he'd pressed shut in his study the night before, opened just slightly further. His eyes moved away from hers for the first time since they'd entered the room. Just a fraction, just a moment. Then he looked back. Necessary, he said, not cruel. But it landed differently this time. Thinner, like a wall that has been load-bearing too long, finally acknowledging, in the language of walls, that it is tired. Jaewon stood very still beside Zara. You handed me stolen code, he said quietly. I handed you a company. You handed me someone else's life's work and told me it was ours. And you built something extraordinary with it. Beck's voice was flat. That should mean something. It means everything, Jaewon said. That's exactly the problem. Zara's hand moved to her clutch. The graphene wafer was exactly where she'd left it. 2 options. 40 seconds. Full thermal runaway. Every server in this room, the entire Cassandra system, Novatech's infrastructure, the $3 billion contract, and everything Jaewon Shin had built in 6 years. Gone. Irreversible. Clean. Or reroute. Broadcast the Cassandra archives, every file, every transfer record, every piece of evidence she had spent weeks compiling, across every screen in the gala below. Expose Bayek. Leave the infrastructure intact. Leave Jaewon something to rebuild correctly, with her name restored to every place it had been removed from. She looked at Bayek. She looked at the servers. She looked at Jaewon, who was looking back at her and not saying a word, not pleading, not bargaining, not making a single argument for his own survival. Just waiting. Whatever she decided, he would accept. She thought about her mother. 8 months of a folded flag and a wrong assumption. 8 months of grief for a daughter who was alive and crawling through someone else's city, learning how to disappear. She thought about the lab, the ceiling, the hand reaching up that grabbed nothing. She hadn't survived the fire to become it. Her fingers moved inside the clutch. Every screen in the grand Hyatt ballroom 40 floors below went white simultaneously. For 2 seconds the gala continued, glasses raised, conversations half finished. Then people started reading. And the conversations stopped, and the glasses lowered. And the room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something true and enormous fills all available space. The Cassandra archives. All of it. Transfer records, internal memos. A hard drive log time-stamped 11 minutes after a lab explosion 6 years ago. Beck's name on every file. And at the top of every screen, in clean white text on black, a name that had been missing for 6 years. Zara Novelle, original architect of the Cassandra Protocol, MIT 2018. Beck stood at the penthouse glass and watched his life's calculation play out across 100 screens simultaneously. The certainty he had maintained for 6 years, the story he had told himself so many times it had become something close to truth, dissolved in the light of those screens like it had never been anything more than what it always was. A lie dressed up as pragmatism. His composure held, but only just, and the crack was visible now to anyone who cared to look. Minister Choi arrived with officials. Police, quiet and efficient. They took Bayek without drama. At the door he paused and looked back at Zara one last time. And this time there was no calculation in his face. Just the stripped-down expression of a man who has finally run out of arguments, including the ones he made to himself. Then he was gone. The room emptied. Just Zara and Jaewon in the cooling server room, the hum of machines settling around them, Seoul blazing through the glass below. Yuna appeared in the doorway. She had come up with the authorities and waited until everyone else left. She walked to Jaewon and took his face in both hands, the way you touch something you love and are choosing to release. "You've been looking for something for a long time," she said softly. "I always thought if I waited long enough, you'd stop looking." A small, sad smile. "I was wrong about that." "Yuna." "Don't." She shook her head gently. "Just be honest. With her. With yourself." She stepped back. "You deserve that. So do I." She walked out without looking back. No bitterness, just grace. The kind that costs something and is chosen anyway. Jaewon stood for a moment in the space she left, then turned back to Zara. "I don't know how to fix what was taken from you." "Neither do I," she said. "Not yet." The city hummed below, indifferent and magnificent and ongoing. "Novatech needs to be restructured," he said. "The contract renegotiated with your name on it. The credit corrected everywhere it was erased. That's not a conversation. That happens regardless. Whatever you decide about everything else." She looked at him. "You'd do that without—" "It's your work," he said simply. "It was always your work." Nobody had said that to her. Not in 6 years. Not without conditions or qualifications or something attached to it. Just, it was always your work. Plain and clean and completely without negotiation. Something that had been held very tightly for a very long time loosened, just slightly, in the center of her chest. He reached into his jacket, the cocktail napkin from Sky Vault, still folded, still there. He held it between them. "You said I missed a variable." "You did. What was it?" She looked at him for a long moment. The 6 years. The fire. The scar. The photograph. The honest answer in the stairwell that he could have dressed up and didn't. The way he'd said it was always your work, like it cost him nothing, because it was simply true. Almost a smile. "I haven't decided yet." He laughed, soft and real and completely unguarded. The first genuine laugh she'd heard from him, unpolished and surprised, the laugh of a man who didn't see it coming. She looked at the napkin in his hand, didn't take it, didn't walk away. They stood side by side at the floor-to-ceiling window, Seoul stretching endlessly below, the napkin held loosely between them, not burned, not resolved, just held, the way you hold something you haven't decided what to do with yet. And sometimes that's exactly where the best things start. Some equations take years to solve. Some variables you don't find in the code, you find them in the person standing next to you when everything else burns down. And sometimes, the most extraordinary thing you can do is choose not to destroy what could still be rebuilt. If this story moved you, and we genuinely hope it did, drop a comment below and tell us which moment hit you hardest. The lab, the napkin, the stairwell, Yuna walking out. We read every single one. And if you watched all the way to the end, you already know this channel is different. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell. Share this with one person who needs to hear a story about choosing not to burn down what could be rebuilt. The next story is already being written. We'll see you there.